Associate producer, Carly Helmetag. Senior audio engineer, Douglas Sugars. Senior audio editor, Melissa Allison, with help from Vicki Merrick and Sydney Lewis. Audio mixing by Jay Allison at Atlantic Public Media. Production help, Debbie Paddock. Our theme music is by Tubab Crew. Additional music by George Brandel Egloff. Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio is distributed by PRX.
The Museum of the American Revolution steps and presents Among His Troops, Washington's portent in a newly discovered watercolor. The exhibit showcases a 235-year-old 7-foot panoramic painting depicting the Continental Army's 1782 encampment at Verplanck's Point and includes the only known depiction of General Washington's headquarters tent in the field, the very tent that is dramatically presented at the museum, now through February 19th. For more, AMREV.
This is WHYY-FM, Philadelphia. WNJN-FM, 89.7, Atlantic City. WNJZ, 90.3, Cape May Courthouse. WNJB-FM, 89.3, Bridgeton. WNJM, 89.9, Manahawkin. And WNJS-FM, 88.1, Berlin.
This is WHYY at 159. Good afternoon. I'm Mary Cummings Jordan. Hope you're enjoying our programming. Fresh Air Weekend is next. WHYY in Philadelphia. I'm Terry Gross with Fresh Air Weekend. Today, Paul Thomas Anderson talks about his new film Phantom Thread, which is nominated for 6 Oscars. Daniel Day-Lewis plays a fashion designer in 1950s London who's obsessive about the dresses he creates.
The last thing that he would like you to look at is the person inside the dress. He wants you to look at the dress. So that's kind of where our story starts to get more interesting, is when the person inside the dress starts to talk back.
Also, we hear from New York Times reporter John Leland. When he was given an assignment to profile New Yorkers over the age of 85, he had some preconceptions about being that old.
Your heart starts working and you don't have sex anymore. You don't work and you don't have anything that gives you purpose. So now it's all over.
He sees old age differently now. And book critic Maureen Corrigan reviews The Perfect Nanny. First News.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Barbara Klein. Afghan officials say a Taliban car bomb has killed at least 95 people in Kabul. 158 are wounded. As Jennifer Glass reports from the Afghan capital, the bomb exploded on a crowded street.
The bomb was in an ambulance, the driver pretending to be heading to a nearby hospital. Police on the heavily guarded street became suspicious and the bomb was set off. The Taliban says police were the targets, but Afghan civilians are among the wounded and the dead. The street was already heavily guarded, with a number of checkpoints on the road to Afghan government offices, embassies, a school, and a hospital. Afghan officials are calling the attack a massacre. It's the second high-profile Taliban assault in a week. Last weekend, Taliban fighters battled Afghan security forces for more than 15 hours in Kabul's Intercontinental Hotel. 25 people were killed, including 4 Americans. For NPR News, I'm Jennifer Glass in Kabul.
Turkey's foreign minister says U.S. troops should pull out of Manbij in northern Syria and cut ties with Syrian Kurdish fighters. This after the Turkish officials said Washington has promised to stop sending weapons to Kurds fighting ISIS in Syria. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports.
Speaking to reporters in Ankara, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said Washington needs to provide more than just promises. It won't give any more weapons to Syrian Kurdish fighters Ankara views as terrorists. Cavusoglu said what's needed are concrete steps, such as Washington cutting ties with the YPG fighters, taking back the weapons they gave them, and withdrawing U.S. troops from the Manbij area, where Turkish forces may head in the next phase of the operation. Separately, Turkish media report 2 civilians were wounded on the Turkish side of the border when a rocket from Syria hit a building in the border town of Kilis. Peter Kenyon, NPR News, Istanbul.
President Trump is back in the U.S. after attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. He's preparing to deliver his first State of the Union address Tuesday. NPR's Tamara Keith tells us White House officials have provided reporters a bit of a preview.
In part, this speech is a chance for President Trump to, in an unfiltered way, pitch his presidency to the American people and say, look, we've been successful, here's how. And So you can expect President Trump to play up the economic numbers, play up the Dow, which has set a lot of records, and also the White House says that he will attempt to strike a tone of unity and optimism.
NPR's Tamara Keith. Czech President Miloš Zeman won a second 5-year term today in a tightly contested presidential runoff election. Zeman is pro-Russian and supports closer ties with China. He beat a political newcomer who's seen as more oriented to the West. This is NPR. Countries around the world are marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day. As NPR's Soraya Sarhadi Nelson reports from Berlin, Germany's chancellor is warning about rising anti-Semitism in her country.
In her weekly podcast, Angela Merkel called it incomprehensible and a disgrace that no Jewish institution can exist here without police security. She said that includes Jewish schools, kindergartens, and synagogues. Merkel urged Germans to join in fighting not only anti-Semitism, but racism. Commemorations are also being held in Auschwitz to mark the 73rd anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi death camp. Soraya Sarhadi Nelson, NPR News, Berlin.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson participated in a wreath-laying ceremony in Warsaw, Poland today at a memorial to Jews who died fighting German forces in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943. Tillerson also delivered remarks along with his Polish counterpart today. Both denounced a planned gas pipeline that would directly link Russia and Germany and increase all of Europe's dependence, he says, on Russian gas.
We see it as undermining Europe's overall energy security and stability, and it provides Russia yet another tool to politicize energy as a political tool.
The pipeline would be the second one to carry Russian gas directly to Germany and Western Europe via the Baltic Sea instead of going through Poland and Ukraine. I'm Barbara Klein, NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Babbel, offering a language program that uses interactive dialogue and speech recognition technology to teach a new language, like Spanish, French, and Italian. Babbel is available in the App Store or online at babbel.com.
This is Fresh Air Weekend. I'm Terry Gross. My guest is screenwriter and director Paul Thomas Anderson. His new film, Phantom Thread, is nominated for 6 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. The film's star, Daniel Day-Lewis, is nominated for Best Actor. Day-Lewis has said this will be his final film. Anderson also wrote and directed Heart 8, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, There Will Be Blood, and The Master. His new film, Phantom Thread, has a great score, and it's nominated for an Oscar, too. Phantom Thread is set in 1950s London. Daniel Day-Lewis plays Reynolds Woodcock, a renowned fashion designer who makes gowns for wealthy women and royalty. In the same way he carefully oversees the handiwork in his dresses, he controls the environment around him, allowing no distractions. Early in the film, you get the impression that he typically has one woman who serves as muse and lover. His sister, Cyril, who runs the business end of their fashion house, suggests that he's grown bored with his current muse, and it's time for her to go. After she does go, he discovers his next muse, model, and lover, Alma, a waitress at a small country restaurant who serves him breakfast. Alma is wearing her waitress uniform, but he sees something in her, and soon he's measuring and fitting her for a beautiful dress. She moves in with him, but she's not easily intimidated or controlled. She has the nerve to tell him she doesn't care for the fabric in one of his dresses, to which Reynolds' sister, Cyril, who seems omnipresent, responds that this is the fabric their customers want and find beautiful. Reynolds tells Alma,
Cyril is right. Cyril is always right. It's not because the fabric's adored by the clients that Cyril is right. It's right because it's right. Because it's beautiful. Maybe one day you'll change your taste, Alma.
Maybe not.
Maybe you have no taste.
Maybe I like my own taste.
Yes.
assert herself. Reynolds begins to regard her as a distraction, an intrusion in his ordered world. Is it now Alma's time to leave? If you know Paul Thomas Anderson's movies, you know that the story is going to head in some unpredictable directions. Paul Thomas Anderson, welcome back to Fresh Air. Thank you so much for coming back. A really amazing movie. Of all the kinds of obsessive artists you could have chosen, why did you choose a high fashion designer from the 1950s to build this movie around?
I think they're known to be the most obsessive of obsessives, from what I hear. You know, I don't know many of them, so a little bit of it's in my imagination, things that I've read about particular guys of this era, the Balenciagas, the Diors, the list goes on. The relationship that they have to their clients was a really rich venue. You know, it kind of lent itself to something very dramatic. It meant that you were going to have clients coming in and going out all day long. The workroom of women was really appealing. You know, I saw a great picture of Dior one time, and there he is at the front of this, literally 300 women in white lab coats, and him at the front. You know, that visually and dramatically was really a great venue for our story.
Well, this seems like a perfectly obsessive role for a very obsessive actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. Did you think about that? Like, did you write the role for him? And did you think, let me give him something super obsessive because he is that way in his approach to acting?
Not that directly. I was thinking very specifically that I wanted to work with Daniel again, so I went to him very early on with a thin premise, which was a relationship movie between a man and a woman. The man has to be self-obsessed, preferably creative, and kind of self-consumed. So what happens when a man like that gets ill? Creating an opening for the woman in his life to have him vulnerable and open, right? That's the basic premise that I went to Daniel with. So we were in search of a job for this character, this imaginary character that we came up with, and some mutual interest and obsession led us to this fashion world. And yes, Daniel can be obsessive. He's known to be obsessive, but what he is what appealed to me was that he's very good at working with his hands. And he notably went off and studied how to make shoes a few years back, and he's always tinkering, and he's really good with his hands. He's a great carpenter. So having him sew or do anything practical with his hands seemed to be right up his alley. Backing up from that, one thing before that was that, you know, it had been a long time since I'd really seen Daniel be elegant and handsome in a film. You know, usually if you're Lincoln, you're Abraham Lincoln, or the thing that we did together before, you're covered in oil. So there's something very debonair is not the right word, and I'm not sure what it is, but when Daniel, when he gets handsome, it can melt you, and I thought it would be nice to see that again. For me, I like seeing him like that. He's got a great sense of style as well, so just capitalizing on that for sure.
So he studied for a year with a costume designer for the New York City Ballet in order to get into this role, and he learned how to design himself. And now he's leaving acting, I think, and going into fashion design. At what point did you find out that he intended this to be his final role?
You know, I think the idea that he's going into fashion design in the future is something that the internet might have made up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Or perhaps that's just speculation on the part of people who don't know. But once we finished shooting, he made his decision that he didn't want to do it again, which either suggests that he had such a great time doing it that he didn't want to try to top himself, or that the other thing, you know. But I don't think it was either. I think he's, you know, he's spoken about this, so I don't feel like I'm betraying his trust. He's flirted with this or said this kind of thing so many times over the years that I'm not surprised, but I am definitely sad, because it's also unlike him to make public announcements, so it feels as if he's done that for a reason, to kind of put a period at the end of something, which, I don't know, I'm trying not to think about it too much, because I'm greedy and I would love to see my performances played.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So, the fashion designer in this, women's bodies is always dressing women, not undressing them. And if they're in a state of undress, it's only to be measured so that they can be dressed.
Yes.
So even though there's a kind of strange love relationship at the center of this, it's always about women being dressed. And the clothes, he's a very controlling man, and the clothes are very controlling too. Like there's often like a tight-fitting bustier top with surrounded by, say, a stiff fabriced cape or a stiff fabriced bottom. And they're beautiful gowns, but you know, they're not the kind of flowing material that sensually moves with you. Can you talk about,
I think. But if I'm honest, I could have had a way out when I was 12 or 13. My life could have been very different. I could have chosen to partake in a surgery and an operation that would make me taller. It's called lymphedema. And they ask you to consider it at that age before you get your growth spurt, before puberty happens. And they deliberately break the bone. And over the course of a year, there are pins in your leg, and you must turn them 1/4 of an inch each day, so that the bone deliberately separates further and further, and new marrow grows. You're confined to a wheelchair for a year, and the maximum height that you can achieve is approximately 6 inches. At 3'5", that would make a big difference. But that's not something I had to decide today as a grown adult. But as just a kid at 12 or 13. I went to the hospital. The doctors told me of the possible complications. I had a surgery date. They said, go home and think about it. I didn't sleep for days. I talked about it with my parents and my siblings. And although they're really supportive, this was my decision to make. And they gave me that freedom to do so. My parents and my family are a little bit different to most people's. My dad is a little person like I am. My mother is of average height, and I'm the eldest of 5 children. All of my brothers and sisters are tall like most of you. And I imagine that informed my decision. Did I want to be like the rest of my brothers and sisters? Or was I happy to be like my dad? I had to question myself. Who was I getting this surgery for? And how would it help? After a long time, I realized that the person who I would be getting this surgery for was not me. But it was for everyone else. It was to make other people feel better about the way that I looked. And at 13, I made the decision that if people didn't like me, if people didn't want to be my friend, or boyfriend, or relationship, or any sort, because I was this size, but they weren't the kind of people I wanted to associate with anyway. And I decided at 13 that I didn't need the surgery to be me. Much like my dad, and with the support of my family and friends, I would find a way out of things. I would find my way around the physical environment, differently perhaps to you, but I would do it. And I think that kind of sense of confidence also spurred a naivety in me. Something which I didn't realize until I entered the big bad world, which for me at 18 or 19 resulted in college. I was training to be a primary school teacher. And I remember on my first few days, a well-meaning friend said to me, Sinead, how are you going to do this? How are you going to work with the children? They're going to be bigger than you. They won't take you seriously. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized she might have a point. And to give you an example of something that happened, I was teaching 6th class boys who are 11 and 12 and approximately 5 foot tall, some of them taller. dance lesson, and my door was open. It was quite a sunny day, and we needed the air. And there was another boy from a young class standing outside my room. And from having a conversation with him, you might understand that he had challenges of his own. But one of the more boisterous individuals in my class stood up, pointed at him and said, "He's a weirdo." What do you do in that situation as a teacher? You have a huge curriculum. Do you keep going because you don't have time? But I felt that comment in my heart, in my head, and in my stomach. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't let it go. I said, "That's interesting. What does that word mean?" I said, "You know, weirdo." I said, "I don't." And thinking of my feet, I asked, "Can we pull out the dictionary and let's have a look what the word means?" So we did. And beside the word weirdo was abnormal. I couldn't believe it. I said, "What does the word normal even mean?" They said, "The same as everything else." I said, "Well, boys, normal for me is being 3'5", being female, not living in Dublin, and not wearing a uniform to school. So if I'm normal, what does that make all of you?" Interestingly, they didn't have that reaction. And there was a bit of thinking, and I said, "Okay, I won't push you. So being normal for you is being male, being about 12 or 13, living in Dublin, and wearing a uniform to school. So if you're all normal, what does that make me?" Personally, that's a really scary place to put yourself in. Professionally, as a teacher, it's terrifying. I had no idea what they would say next. I was hoping it wouldn't be a derogatory comment about my teaching. All of a sudden, I could remember my first year in college and my friend telling me, "How are you going to do this? How will the children treat you seriously?" And I was panicking up at the top of the room. I'm not afraid to admit that I was vulnerable standing there. And one of the quieter boys in the class put up his hand. And he said, "Don't worry, Miss Burke. You're not a weirdo. You're just different." Never in my life have I been more proud to be different than in that moment. Being a little person has shaped my experiences. It has molded my personality. But it doesn't define me. And if I was to look back, or put myself in the position again, of the car stopping beside me, of the passenger taking my photo, and if for whatever reason I had a magic wand, or some higher power, and I could choose to play any character in that story, I would pick me every single time. Garmil Waqif.
Sinead Burke is currently a PhD student within the School of Education at Trinity College Dublin. She is the alternative Miss Ireland Emeritus and documents the lives of some of the country's most intriguing people on her blog, Mini Mélange. The Moth Radio Hour is produced by Atlantic Public Media in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and presented by PRX.
The president campaigned against the, quote, global elites, and then this week he went off to Davos, which is like the Burning Man for bankers. Maybe he just wants to look them in the eyes when he karate chops them. But Peter Sagal will get in his face as he gets in theirs. Plus, we ask actress Kristen Ritter about playing a superhero who thinks superheroes are stupid. Join us for the news quiz from NPR. Tomorrow at 4 on 93.9 FM WNYC.
Support for WNYC comes from In the Body of the World, the new play written and performed by Eve Ensler, creator of the Vagina Monologues. The author, performer, and activist brings this personal work to life on stage at Manhattan Theater Club through March 25th. WNYC is a media partner of Brooklyn Flea, with the Winter Flea Market in Industry City, Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. 60 vendors selling vintage, design, food, and more, now through March. Info at brooklynflea.com.
This is the Moth Radio Hour from PRX. I'm Jay Ellison. You're listening to a special edition of the Moth Radio Hour with stories recorded live at an event held in Dublin, Ireland. One note, this next story coming up involves vivid memories of the Holocaust and might not be appropriate for all listeners. Here's your host, Dan Kennedy.
When I asked our next storyteller what was the last rule you broke, the first thing he said is, I am the most obedient person, which I thought, like, he really wanted to make that clear. He was like, first of all, and I was like, okay, understood. Can you dig deep? You know, take yourself too seriously, I told him. And in the next breath, he said, well, I am a cyclist, and I do run red lights constantly. Please welcome to the stage, Tommy Reichenthal.
Well, I'm in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. I don't even know what concentration camp is. I'm only 9-year-old, and I see barbed wire around me and a watchtower, so I know I'm not free. Not long before, I was in my village called Merašice in Slovakia, where I was still playing. In summer I used to run barefoot, in winter we used to toboggan. So this place was for me sort of a little paradise. But now I found myself that I'm a little prisoner. I'm confused. I'm starving, I'm cold, and I'm very, very miserable. It was 16th of October 1944 when we were betrayed, arrested by the Gestapo and deported to this hell on earth, Bergen-Belsen. And I remember this particular day when we, the children, began to realize what is happening around us and learn while the adult already knew. There was a usual routine. We were in Bergen-Belsen, perhaps 10 days, 2 weeks. Every morning we have to go on a roll call, and we have to stand in freezing cold outside for an hour to wait for our supervisor. They were young women SS guard. But this particular day, they were accompanied by a group of armed soldiers. And I could hear whisper around, something is wrong. Why these soldiers? They would call our number and we had to say, yeah. After the roll call, we were told to go to the hut and bring our blankets and towels out because we are going to go to another place to have a shower. Now that was good news, a hot shower. We're going to go to walk, and for me it was great news because I didn't need to go to the washroom outside with washing myself with freezing cold water. But there were looks around, and I thought the people felt sort of uncomfortable, and we ran in to pick up the blankets and the towels, and there was quite activity inside the hut. And I saw this woman sort of leans against her neighbor and said, "You think everything is